Hi, my name is Francisco and welcome to another video of the Marketing Research series. And this time I'm going to talk about how to prepare for an in-depth interview. So if you watch one of the videos in a series about exploratory research design, you will know that in-depth interviews is a method of an exploratory design that allows marketers to have an in-depth understanding of what consumers think and also how they behave. And preparing for the interview is super important. Very often students of mine and others as well, they'll think that it's just making up questions, and if you just make up some questions you'll be able to understand how consumers think. But there's way more than that, than just simply coming up with questions, and that's what I'd like to talk to you about, going step by step. So the first thing that I would suggest is making a list of all of the topics that you would like to address. For example, let's assume that you want to do an interview about consumers' decision-making process. All right, that's the general topic, but what about the decision-making process that you want to discuss? Do you want to discuss post-purchase evaluation? Do you want to discuss risk perception? Would you like to discuss evaluation of alternatives, so how consumers compare and evaluate products? Would you like to discuss external information search? So what is it about the entire decision-making model, decision-making process model that you would like to understand? So the very first thing that I would definitely suggest is making a list of the actual topics that you want to address, because the worst thing that can happen is you run an interview, especially if it's someone important that it's difficult for you to set the meeting time, and you finally manage to get and develop conduct the interview, and then afterwards like, oh no, I should have addressed this or that topic. So making a list is really important, because also in the end, once you come up with the questions that you're going to create in order to address each of these topics, you can see, right? You can have a visual overview of the entire interview, how it's going to go, and then it's going to allow you, it's going to help you not forget any important topic. After you've defined which topics you want to address, the second topic that I would suggest to you is create questions wisely. What do I mean by wisely? I mean here two things. One is in terms of format. The main mistake that people make when they're developing interviews is to frame the question in the way that it would lead to a superficial answer. Because if you create a superficial question, it would lead to a superficial answer. And one of the main mistakes with that is framing the question in a binary way. For example, imagine you're interviewing someone and you ask them, do you think that whatever, and then the response is, yeah, I think. What can you do with that answer? Absolutely nothing. So in order for you to avoid these binary answers, frame the questions like, to which extent, how would you describe, or how influential, or please describe a moment in which. It's impossible if you ask someone with starting a question with, to which extent, how would you describe a moment, that they're going to answer with a yes or no. But if you ask them, do you think, they'll say, yeah, I do. And there's nothing that you can do with that answer. And remember, the whole purpose of exploratory studies is to gain this in-depth interview. And if your question is not inducing this depth, then you're not actually reaching what the whole purpose of the study will be about. So the first thing is in terms of format, avoid framing the questions in a binary way. So do you think, have you decided? So if you frame it in any of these ways, people answer yes or no, and then there's no depth. Another thing in terms of formatting is when it comes to the amount of questions, right? So usually the students will ask me, well, how many questions should I have? What is the maximum limit? And to be fair, there's no limit. Of course that there's a saturation point, but saturation meaning that you've covered everything that you need to cover. So the main answer in terms of amount of question is the quality of these questions, and to which extent you can cover all of the topics that you define on the beginning. That is the most important thing. You can have 20 questions that will tell you nothing. You can have 6 questions that's going to lead to a wonderful discussion. So it really depends on the quality of the questions and to which extent they truly address the topics that you define in the beginning. And this is exactly the second point that I would like to talk about, which is of validity. Validity in broad terms is the extent to which we answer what we want to answer, or that we research what we want to research. So all of the topics that you define in the beginning, are your questions really addressing those issues? If they're not, you can say that you're doing a project about consumer decision-making process, but if the questions are not really addressing that, then you're not making a project about decision-making. So you have to make sure that the questions that you're coming up with actually address the topics that you've defined in the beginning. And this is really hard for me to explain here with clear examples. So I would suggest you discuss this with your professor, with your supervisor, whoever you're working with, and to make sure that the questions that you have come up with actually fulfill those topics that you previously defined. Another very important topic in terms of formatting the question is their logical sequencing. You gotta make sure that it has a flow and you don't start with touching on sensitive topics, because it's very important for the respondent to gain trust on the interviewer. So usually we'll start with easier questions or questions that can build confidence of the respondent, so they can create a small relationship there with you. And the more trust that the respondent will have in the interviewer, the more likely it is that they will touch later on sensitive topics that potentially are relevant for your study. And my final suggestion will be run pre-tests. Very often when we do something, when we develop questions and so on, they are clear for us, but not necessarily they're going to be clear for the respondent. Or for example, if you're doing a research project about a particular topic and you're discussing co-creation or you're discussing technology acceptance, maybe these topics are clear for you, but if they're not clear to the respondent, the interview is not going to flow. So if you run pre-tests, just asking a few friends or someone that is also within the population of your study, excuse me, just to see how how they understand these questions and how the logical sequencing of these questions will flow. So you don't want to have mistakes, or you don't want to have these issues when the interview is actually happening. So just take 1 day or 2 days to run a few pre-tests. Make sure that the respondents understand what you mean, that the questions are clear, that the logical sequencing is okay, that the question is not taking too long, and everything being okay, then you press go and actually start doing your interview. So my friend, in a nutshell, these would be my recommendations for the preparation of your interview. Make sure that you define the topics, make sure that you frame the questions wisely to avoid these binary answers, make sure that you consider their logical sequencing, make sure that you address the validity of the questions, make sure that you do pre-tests before you actually conduct your interview. And by doing all of those things, I'm pretty confident that you're going to have a wonderful interview that is going to generate really an in-depth understanding about how consumers think, how they behave, and much more. And to finish up, please subscribe to the channel. And my album recommendation this time would be Are You Experienced by Jimi Hendrix, an absolutely classic album that I listen very frequently. All the absolute best. Take care and bye-bye.